G'day, Trooper Cody here, and as you can just see by that enormous yawn, couldn't have got him to do it if I asked him to. It's getting late, the sun's setting, it's about 8 o'clock at night or so here on a beautiful Aussie autumn evening. Thank you, Cody. Excellent work. And the lad's ready for bed. It's been a big day today, and this is our last video that we're going to make, and it's as a result of the book, The Forgotten Soldier. I mentioned Memel, M-E-M-E-L, in the video I made. I had a few people ask me about what I was talking about with Memel. So what happened is, how can we keep this short? Have you heard of Prussia? Not Russia, but Prussia. So Prussia was an area of Germanic ancestry with aristocracy, the barons, so it was Prussia. How well described was that? Can you imagine doing that to your high school or geography teacher? Anyway, you get my drift. There's a place called Prussia, and what happened is it was the First World War. And after the First World War, what was one of the biggest mistakes they made? Why do these people the mistakes they make? So there is the Treaty of Versailles, and when they do this, they are really, really bad to Germany. People are going to say, this tired and grumpy, people are going to say that what the Germans did in the First World War, they had to be punished. Hadn't they been punished enough? Anyway, one of the things they did is they said that Prussia, this area up in the Baltic, was no longer going to belong to Germany. It was now going to be governed by the League of Nations, and the League of Nations, in the fullness of time, when they thought the time was right, would say to the people of Prussia, you vote, you decide if you want to be part of Germany or not. So, having made that decision, and let's not get into all of the other animosities about that treaty that caused problems in Germany, but what happened is that in the end of the 30s, Hitler is pretty obviously going to invade and take over the area that was once Prussia. So they decide they're going to try and do the right thing, and they're going to vote, and they're going to ask people, do you want to be part of Germany? No need to invade if you want to be part of Germany. And so they voted, and the result of that vote was 80% of the population wanted to go back and be part of Germany. And so that's what happened. The area becomes back part of Germany. 1939. Okay, sadly it all goes horrendously pear-shaped after Operation Barbarossa, and the Russians are just smashing their way back, and they are pushing the German soldiers, decimating them and pushing them back to the west. And when they're doing this, they're not being too nice about it. And it is clear that there is genocide of anyone left behind. Civilians we're talking about. No prisoners. Prisoners are all being shot, but civilians too, children, old people, and don't even think about what are happening to the women when the Russians get hold of the women. So what happens is they are slowly retreating west into this sort of pocket. German soldiers, no ammo, no food, and they're dealing with hundreds of thousands of civilians trying to escape with them. Then the Red Army decide to split the forces, and so down below Prussia they push their way through to the coast, and that pocket then, in that pocket of Prussia where we've got the Baltic Sea, has an enormous number of soldiers and civilians trapped in an ever-shrinking pocket. The Germans, when you look, if you look this up on Wikipedia to see what battalions and what regiments are fighting the Russians in this area. What's so fascinating about it is you will read remnants of this battalion, remnants of that battalion. They've been decimated in the retreat, and there are ragtag survivors who managed to create a barrier, if you like, around Memel. Fortunately, the Russians concentrate their activities elsewhere. They don't give up on this area. They're still attacking it, bombarding it, bombing it, strafing it, artillery. But to a degree, they are not just smashing their way into Memel. So Admiral Garnetts decides we have to save all of these people, not just the troops, the people as well. We have to save them. And he creates Operation Hannibal, which turns out to be the biggest evacuation from the area of Memel ever in the history of the planet. So just some statistics to give you an idea. The evacuation of Dunkirk, movies about Dunkirk. How many movies specifically about Dunkirk, or movies that in part are about Dunkirk? What a thing, what a thing. I'm English, but Dunkirk was 338,000 soldiers evacuated by ship. Over a period of 15 weeks, slightly over 1,000 vessels evacuate almost 1 million civilians and 350,000 German troops. So Dunkirk was 338,000 troops. Operation Hannibal was 20,000 more troops and nearly 1 million civilians. What is so incredible about this, and somebody wrote it beautifully on my, forgive me for not remembering now who it was, but somebody wrote really well about history is written by the victors, and heaven forbid the losers also be of a certain political party that begins with an N, because you will never ever have anyone expressing any sympathy or regard. So we are now talking 1.3 million people are evacuated over 15 weeks by 1,000 ships. So having told you that amazing figure, let me just say, a slight aside, have you heard of a boat called the Titanic? I'm sure you have. Leonardo certainly has. has. So 1,500 people drowned on the Titanic. 1,500. What about the Lusitania? Almost as famous as the Titanic, do you think? So the Lusitania, 1,200 people drowned on the Lusitania. When I tell you that over 1,000 ships were involved in the evacuation of Memel over a 15-week period, I'm just going to tell you about what happened to 3 of those ships. So the first one is the Goya. The Goya was a Norwegian freighter, and it took on board around 7,000 people in the evacuation. Pulled up at the docks, and around 7,000 people got on board the Goya, and it went heading off to get the people to safety. Along comes the L3 Russian submarine, 7,000 people. And it sinks the Goya, that Norwegian freighter, and there are 183 survivors. We're talking the Baltic, we're talking freezing water, and horrendous loss of life. That was Goya. So the next one we'll talk about is the General von Steuben. This was a passenger liner. This was a passenger liner that, if you look it up these days, you'll say, oh, it was a passenger liner, but it had been converted into an armed transport ship. Well, the General von Steuben pulled up at Memel, and it took on board 3,000 wounded soldiers. It took on board 1,000 civilians. It had 300 medical staff, and it also had numerous unaccounted nurses. And the crew, over 5,000 drowned when a Russian submarine sank the General von Steuben. So remember, Titanic had 1,500, Lusitania had 1,200, the Goya lost 7,000, the General von Steuben lost 5,000, but we still have one more ship to talk about. So that ship we're going to talk about, you can look at pictures of it on the internet. There's this beautiful white ocean liner. And that beautiful white ocean liner is called the Wilhelm Gustloff. Now, the Wilhelm Gustloff was one of the first ships to get to Memel to take on people on board, and the Germans, in their efficiency, had set up a numbering ticket system. They knew how many people were going to be on board the ship, how many the ship could safely take, and the people formed queues. And even when you look at the book The Forgotten Soldier, one of the comments he makes is he cannot believe how people stood in the queue so calmly, waiting to go their turn to get on the boat. Even when the Russians' aircraft came strafing the docks, those people stayed in the queue. So what happened is, this particular ship takes on board, it's allotted several thousand people that it was supposed to take on board, when sadly there is a mass panic, and they can't control the crowd as the crowd storm the gangplanks, push past the guards, and pile on board the ship. So now we're talking the Wilhelm Gustloff, a hospital ship, a passenger liner that had been turned into a clearly marked hospital ship. And there are estimates that that ship took on board somewhere between 10,500 and 15,000 of the refugees. Most of them were civilians. Only military were wounded, but it was predominantly civilians. That ship, long story, complicated story, basically middle of the night, has its running lights on, is white hospital ship with its lights on, when along comes an alcoholic Russian captain of the S-13, and he sees the white ship with all its lights on and fires torpedoes at it, and sadly it sinks at night in poor weather in freezing cold water. So of the guessed to be somewhere around the 10,500 to possibly 15,000 people on board that ship, 1,200 are rescued. Really, it's pretty safe to say, do I need to say it again, 1,500 on the Titanic, everybody's heard of it. Well over 10,000, who knows, several thousand more than that, on the Wilhelm Gustloff, and most people probably have never even heard of it. So there we go. We are talking more than 20,000 predominantly civilians drowned from just 3 ships sunk by Russian submarines, and you hardly hear a thing about it. Absolute shocking, shocking tragedy. Overall, it was a huge success. Of those 1,000 ships, most got through, but by gosh, a couple of them were bad. Well, listen, the lad's been really good. He's completely jacked off because the sun's setting, And while we've been making this video, the other horses have been heading down to bed, and it's just not fair, still working while everyone else is heading off to bed. So we're going to wrap it up there. If you want to see more bad behaviour, how could you call that bad behaviour? Want to see more of Cody's stories? Stay tuned, come back soon, look after yourself, take care, click subscribe, click like, make a comment. Time for bed, eh mate? Time for bed. Cheers.